He got promoted to CEO, and I'm still stuck as a junior manager. We got hired on the same day, same role, same office, different outcomes. And here's the kicker. He had way fewer skills than I did. Didn't know consulting, didn't know KPIs, didn't even know Excel. But he climbed to the top, while I stayed invisible. This is not just a story about a job. This is a story about how the world sees talent, or refuses to see it, when it comes in the wrong color. So stay with me, because what I'm about to share is not just my story. It might be yours too. And by the end, you'll know exactly when I realized that being great was not enough. Not when your skin makes people see you differently. I still remember the smell of that office lobby. Fresh paint, fake leather chairs, and that kind of silence that buzzes with nerves and ambition. It was my first real corporate job. Stratagem Solutions, a fast-growing tech consulting firm with sleek branding and glass walls. I had worked for this moment. I mean, really worked. Top of my class. Internships every summer. Case studies. Volunteer projects. I even helped a struggling startup double their revenue in 3 months. And yet, even with all that, I was nervous walking in that day. I wore my best shirt, polished my shoes twice, practiced my handshake and smile in the mirror over and over again. My palms were sweaty when I touched the front door handle. I told myself it was just excitement. Then I stepped inside. That's when I saw him. Jason Carter. White guy. Tall. Blue eyes. Hair like the wind styled it on purpose. He was dressed casual. Not messy, but casual in a way that said he didn't worry about looking professional. Like the world already assumed he belonged. We both sat at the front desk. New hires. Filling out paperwork. He smiled. Chatted easy. Asked where I was from. What I studied. What team I'd be joining. He was nice. Chill. Not arrogant. But something felt off. He mentioned he didn't really know Excel. Didn't come from consulting. Didn't even know what a KPI was. And yet, here he was, sitting next to me, being hired by a tech consulting firm. Like it was no big deal. I laughed politely, said something like, "Guess we'll learn together." But a part of me, the quiet part, felt something shift. I had worked so hard just to sit in that chair. And he seemed like he just showed up. The first few weeks felt like a blur. New systems, new faces, new routines. But I showed up early, stayed late, took notes, asked questions, learned fast. Every time someone needed help, I volunteered. Every time there was a challenge, I raised my hand. I didn't just want to prove myself. I felt like I had to. Like I had something to prove that others did. Jason, on the other hand, He coasted. He was always relaxed, slouched in meetings, joked with the managers like he'd known them for years, got invited to lunch after day 2, golf by week 3. Meanwhile, I was still trying to memorize names, still trying to be perfect, still trying to not mess up. I remember one meeting clearly. We were brainstorming a client pitch. I suggested an approach using predictive modeling. Silence. Then Jason said, almost the same idea, just with different words. Suddenly, the room lit up. Everyone nodded. One manager said, "That's exactly the kind of thinking we need." I smiled politely, but inside, something cracked a little. It wasn't the first time it happened, and it definitely wouldn't be the last. There were little things, comments in meetings, the way someone looked surprised when I had a great idea, the way Jason's ideas were praised, even when they were half-baked, or how my suggestions would be ignored, until someone else, usually someone white, repeated the same thought, and suddenly it became genius. It made me question my own reality. Was I imagining it? Was I too sensitive? Or was there an invisible filter that blurred my voice, but made Jason's crystal clear? I tried not to let it get to me. I really did. I kept working harder, reading late into the night, building better decks, staying on top of deliverables, double-checking every detail. But hard work wasn't translating into recognition. At one point, I led a client workshop solo. The feedback came back glowing. The client said it was the best workshop they'd attended that quarter. And still, no one mentioned it in our team huddle. No shout out. No email. No pat on the back. Jason. He helped design a slide deck. That was it. But the next day, he got praised publicly for his creativity. I remember walking home that evening, thinking, what am I doing wrong? Why does it feel like I'm running with weights on my ankles while he's gliding on a moving walkway? I wanted to believe it was just in my head, that maybe things would balance out eventually, that maybe I was just overthinking everything. But I knew better, because deep down, I recognized that feeling. It wasn't new. It started way before Stratagem Solutions. It started in college, in high school, even earlier. That subtle, constant reminder that you have to be twice as good to get half as far. At Stratagem, that reminder was wearing a smile and a dress shirt and shaking my hand. I kept hoping. Maybe it was just the beginning. Maybe once people saw my results, they would notice. They would listen. They would promote. But as weeks turned into months, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Jason made mistakes. Big ones. He once missed a client deadline, forgot to submit deliverables, sent an incomplete report. He laughed it off. The manager waved it away. Just a learning curve. They said, if that had been me, if I had missed that deadline, or sent that report, there would have been consequences. Not just a talking to. I could have been labeled unreliable, not a team player, not client ready. I knew the game. I just hoped that this time it would be different. It wasn't just the big things. It was the pattern of small things, stacked one after another. Jason got looped into higher-level meetings. Even when I had done the prep work, I would build the analysis. He would present it. Sometimes, he didn't even understand what he was saying. I could tell. He'd fumble the terms, mix up definitions, misstate the client's goals. But no one corrected him. They just nodded, smiled, let it slide. Me. I had to rehearse every slide, memorize every number, back everything up with a source. Because if I slipped, even a little, I knew it would be remembered. I tried not to let it harden me, but every time I got skipped over, every time someone said, "Jason's such a natural," I felt myself shutting down a bit more. What did they mean by natural? He wasn't doing anything I couldn't do. In fact, he wasn't doing half of what I did. There was this one afternoon. We were both up for leading a new client propose. It was a big deal. Everyone wanted it. I stayed late every night that week. Built the deck. Created the client roadmap. Mapped out risk factors. Prepared follow-up materials. The manager said, "We'll review both of your ideas tomorrow. Let's see which direction makes more sense." That morning, I was ready. I had rehearsed everything. I had notes. I had backup plans. Jason came in late, holding a smoothie, and said, "Oh yeah, let me just talk through my concept real quick. No visuals, no numbers, just him talking, freestyling." He smiled a lot, made a few jokes, talked about vibes, talked about how it's all about relationships. Said something like, "I just want to keep it light and fresh for them." And then, the manager said, "You know what? That's the energy we need. Let's go with Jason's approach." I sat there, quiet, hands still holding my printouts, my slide deck, my research. No one asked to see it. No one said, "Let's hear both sides." I nodded, said okay, tried to keep my face neutral. But inside, I was screaming. It wasn't just rejection. It was erasure. Like my work, my time, my expertise didn't matter because it didn't come from the right person. Afterwards, Jason patted me on the shoulder, said, "Sorry, dude. Guess I just got lucky today." Lucky. That word hit me harder than I expected. Because I realized he believed it. He really thought it was luck, not privilege. Not bias, not favoritism, just luck. That evening, I went home, sat on my couch in the dark. No music, no distractions. I just sat, thinking, how long am I supposed to wait before someone notices the weight I'm carrying? Before someone sees that I'm not just good, I'm exceptional, that I've been doing twice the work, with half the praise. When does it get better? When do they stop seeing color and start seeing skill? Because I was running out of patience and hope and energy to keep pretending that I didn't notice what was happening. There was this leadership program they announced, a new internal development track for future executives. Only 5 people would be chosen. It was meant to be competitive, a selective, a big deal, the kind of thing that could change your whole career path. I knew I was ready. I had the performance reviews, the results, the client wins, even a few senior consultants who vouched for me. So I applied, submitted my package, outlined everything I'd contributed, all the initiatives I had led. Jason applied too. He didn't even finish his application. He said, "Man, I just threw something together last minute." He told me that with a laugh, like it was just a game to him. I checked my email every day that week, kept refreshing, kept hoping. Then, on Friday afternoon, the list was posted. Jason's name was on it. Mine was. I stared at the screen, waiting for something to make sense. Like maybe I missed a second page. Maybe my name was just further down. But it wasn't there. People clapped when they saw Jason. He got handshakes, smiles, a pat on the back from our director. He said, "Guess I must have impressed someone." But even he sounded unsure. I wanted to ask, what did he do? What did he show? That I did. But I already knew. He didn't have to prove himself. He just had to show up. I had to outperform, outthink, outwork. And still, it wasn't enough. I walked past the break room. He was in there, laughing, saying how this was probably gonna fast-track him to VP someday. My stomach turned. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pull out the data, the numbers, the client wins. But I did. I walked back to my desk, sat down, and stared at my screen. The cursor blinked, like it was mocking me. I had done everything right. Everything. And it still wasn't enough. That weekend, I didn't leave my apartment, didn't return texts, didn't even turn on the TV. I just kept replaying everything. Every late night. Every email I had double-checked. Every idea that got taken and renamed. Every smile I had forced. Every time I told myself, keep your head down. Be patient. It'll pay off. But now, I wasn't so sure. What if the system was never designed to see me? What if it was only meant to use me? Until I burned out or gave up, I started questioning everything. Was I overthinking? Was I imagining it? But no, I knew better. I had the proof. I had lived it. And worst of all, I couldn't talk to anyone about it. Because when you bring it up, they say, "Are you sure? Maybe it's not about race. Maybe it's just timing. Maybe Jason's just a better culture fit." Culture fit. That one always gets me. What does that even mean? Speak softer. Laugh louder. Don't talk about uncomfortable things. Code 4. Be more like him. And less like you. But I couldn't be him. And I shouldn't have to be. Because I was good. Damn good. And still, it wasn't seen. And I started to ask myself, what would it take to finally be seen? To finally be valued? Not tolerated, but respected. Not questioned, but believed. How many more wins? How much more silence? How much more of myself would I have to cut off just to get a shot at what came to Jason so effortlessly? I started showing up earlier and staying later, thinking maybe if they saw me more, they'd see me better. But all it did was make me more invisible. I'd walk through the office at 7 a.m., lights half off, coffee still brewing in the break room. My desk was always clean, organized, prepared, like I was trying to prove my worth. Through neatness and order, Jason started coming in later and later. Sometimes at 10, sometimes after lunch. No one said a word. One day, he came in wearing flip-flops. Said he just got back from a beach weekend. No emails answered. No updates shared. And still, everyone laughed. Told him to show pics. I thought, if I showed up like that, they'd call it unprofessional. Say I lacked polish. That I wasn't serious enough. But for him, it was just personality. Charming even. That's when I realized the rules weren't the same. They were written in invisible ink, and only certain people knew how to read them. I once spoke up in a meeting, suggested a new client onboarding flow. Streamlined, efficient, based on our last 3 client mistakes. Nobody responded. They just kept moving. 2 days later, Jason brought up the same process, almost word for word. And the manager said, "Now that's forward thinking." I didn't say anything, just smiled and said, "Yeah, great idea." That was becoming my job. To be the silent author of Jason's success. Every win he had my fingerprints on it. And still, he got the spotlight. I remember this one Friday. We had a team lunch, outdoor picnic. Everyone was relaxed, joking around. Jason pulled the director aside, said something I couldn't hear. Later, the director announced Jason would be leading a new strategy initiative. No one else had been considered. No one else even knew it was an option. He was just given it, like a gift, wrapped in casual conversation. I sat there, holding my plastic fork, trying to chew my salad, while my stomach turned. It wasn't just about the role. It was about how easily it came to him, how naturally the room leaned in when he spoke, how effortlessly the door opened when he knocked, or sometimes, when he didn't knock at all. And here I was, still waiting, still knocking, still wondering if they even heard me. I started feeling tired. Not just body tired, but soul tired. The kind of tired that comes from swallowing your voice. Day after day, meeting after meeting. I'd come home, sit on the edge of my bed, and feel the silence echo. Not from the room, but from inside. I had stopped talking about work with friends, because every story felt the same. Another missed credit. Another taken idea. Another slow erosion of who I was. I wondered, is this how it always is? For people like me, do we always have to fight? To be seen? To be heard? Or to just exist? Not as someone angry. Not as someone playing the race card. But as someone worthy. Worthy without having to prove it. So over and over and over again. That weekend, I wrote a resignation letter. I didn't send it, but I wrote it, just to see how it felt, just to imagine walking away. From all the games, all the filters, all the pretending. But I didn't walk away. Not yet. Because something in me saw. Vid. Not like this. You don't give up your seat. When you built the damn table, Monday came again. Like it always does. Dragging its feet. Heavy with routine. But this time, I walked into that office differently. Not louder. Not angrier. Just more awake. I started noticing things I had ignored before. Not because they weren't there, but because I had trained myself not to see them. Like how the senior partners only remembered Jason's name, even though I was in the same room. How my ideas had to be polished, perfect, practiced, while his could be half-baked and still praised as genius. There was a meeting that morning. Strategy update. Big client push. Jason walked in 5 minutes late. No laptop. No notes. Just a smile and that same carefree confidence. The VP clapped him on the back. Said, "Glad you're here, buddy. We need your energy." Meanwhile, I had been prepping slides all weekend. Forecasts, competitor research, client churn models. I presented it. All of it. Clear. Tight. Insightful. They nodded. Took a few notes. Then turned to Jason and asked, "What do you think?" He said, "Looks solid. We should run with it." And that was it. his stamp of approval. That's all it took. They acted like the brilliance came from his mouth, even though he barely said 5 words. I wanted to laugh, but it wasn't funny. It was just real. I started watching The Office like a scientist, looking for patterns, measuring reactions, how people stood when he entered a room, how jokes landed differently depending on who told them, how small things, tone, eye contact, body language, spoke volumes. There was a moment that week I won't forget. A client sent in praise for a recent pitch, said the framework was innovative, said they loved the clarity. The email had my name on it. Clearly. Jason replied to all. Said, "Thanks, team. Glad we pulled it off." No mention of me. No nudge. No redirect. And no one corrected it. No one said, "Hey, this was actually her work." I stared at that screen for a long time, reading that line again. Glad we pulled it off. We. It was always we. Until it came time to give credit. Then it was just him. That night, I sat in my car, engine running, rain tapping on the windshield, thinking, maybe I need to start documenting everything, saving emails, keeping a paper trail. But what does that say when the only way to be heard is to defend your voice before it's even spoken? I thought about leaving. Again. Not just the company, but the whole game. Start fresh. Freelance. Maybe go back to school. Find a space where I didn't have to shrink. But a part of me knew that leaving wouldn't fix what the world refused to see. If I left, Jason would climb higher, use the foundation I built, the tools I sharpened, the trust I earned, and no one would ever know. Because I had made myself too quiet, too small, too polite, too strategic in my survival. So I made a decision. Not to explode, not to accuse, but to shift. If the room wasn't going to hear me, then I'd make a new room. If the system didn't see my value, I'd make my own system. It didn't have to be loud. It just had to be clear. I stopped waiting for permission, stopped holding back my thoughts, stopped nodding when I wanted to challenge. And the weirdest thing happened. Some people started listening. Not all. Not the top brass. Not yet. But others. The quiet ones. The ones watching just like I had watched. They saw the chain. And they lined in. I wasn't just doing this for me anymore. I was doing it for them. For all the people who sat in silence, waiting for someone to say out loud, "This isn't fair. This isn't normal. This is okay." It wasn't a revolution. Not yet. It was just a decision. To stop being invisible, even if it meant being uncomfortable. Because real change doesn't start with permission. It starts with presence. There's something powerful about showing up differently, without saying a word, Not louder, not flashier, just more rooted, more still, more real. That week, I stopped second-guessing my voice. If I had an idea, I said it. If I disagreed, I said it. If someone interrupted, I calmly said, "Let me finish my thought." It was awkward at first. You could feel the room flinch, like no one expected me to take up space. But I stayed with it. My voice didn't shake anymore. My hands didn't sweat as much. And my eyes, they started meeting people's stares. Not with fear, but with full presence. There was a Tuesday, quarterly review session. All department heads invited. Jason was there. Of course. He had barely prepared. Again. He spoke casually, almost dismissively, about client goals, product expansion, team wins. I spoke after him. Slides clear, data tight, message focused. There was a moment, mid-presentation. I caught Jason glancing at me. Not his usual smirk, but something else. Unease maybe. Curiosity. Like he was watching someone he hadn't really noticed before, and wasn't quite sure what to make of it. Later that day, I was in the break room, warming up my lunch. One of the analysts, Sophia, approached me. "Sage," he said, "I just wanted to say, that thing you said about retention modeling. No one's explained it like that before. It actually made sense." I thanked her, smiled, but inside, something cracked open, because it meant someone was listening. Not just nodding along, but really listening. I started noticing more. People sending me DMs, asking for help, wanting to loop me in on things they'd normally ask Jason. It wasn't a tidal wave, but it was a shift. One afternoon, I was walking to a meeting and heard someone behind me say, "She's really smart. Why hasn't she been promoted yet?" I didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge it, but I heard it, and I remembered it, because people were starting to say out loud what I had whispered to myself for years: that something wasn't right, that the ladder was crooked, that talent wasn't always the thing that got rewarded. Jason noticed too. He started asking more questions about things he used to shrug off, started copying me on emails that he would have normally kept private. It wasn't guilt. Not really. It was strategy. He could see the room shifting, and he wanted to stay in control. But I wasn't interested in control. I was interested in clarity. I wanted to see who would rise when things were finally transparent, who would speak when the air got thinner, who would stand beside me, not just behind me. I stopped trying to prove I belonged and started acting like I already did. I still did the work, still arrived early, still stayed late sometimes, but I stopped performing. I stopped turning myself into what they expected and became exactly who I already was. People started taking notes. Literally. During my meetings, they started quoting me, referencing my frameworks, bringing up my name in strategy huddles. One director said, "We should get her involved. She sees angles that others miss." I didn't smile, didn't deflect. I just nodded and said, "I'll take the lead." Because I had been leading, quietly, for a long time. They were just catching up. That weekend, I met up with an old mentor, a Professor Kelly, the one who first told me, "Your voice is not too loud. The room is just too quiet." I told her everything about Jason, the company, the shift. She listened, then said, "It's happening. Your presence is waking people up. Not everyone, but enough." That stuck with me, because change isn't always big. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it starts as a whisper that someone else repeats, and then someone else, until finally, it becomes the thing people can't unhear. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I wasn't trying to burn anything down. I just wanted to be seen, fully, accurately, not through filters, not through assumptions, just seen, for the work, for the insight, for the truths. And slowly, it was starting to happen. It was subtle at first, the way people started changing their tone around me. Not just more polite, but more careful, more considered. Like my words were being measured now, not dismissed. A few weeks passed. We had a new project kicking off, a massive client in retail tech. And this time, leadership decided to form a special task force. 5 people, cross-functional, fast-track visibility, high stakes. My name was on the list. Jason's was. He didn't take it well. He didn't say anything directly, but I saw it in how he acted. Passive digs in meetings, correcting me on things that weren't wrong, looping in other people unnecessarily, trying to regain control, without looking obvious. But I didn't flinch, because I had finally found something solid under my feet. Not titles, not approval, but my own ground. That team, the special task force, we worked late nights, whiteboard sessions that stretched past dinner, disagreements, tensions. But we built something. The client called it game-changing. My frameworks drove the roadmap. My insights shaped the pitch. My voice led the call. And for the first time, everyone saw it. All at once. Even the VP. Oh, she said, "Where have you been hiding?" I said, "Nowhere. Just wasn't being looked at." And she paused, then nodded, like she understood more than she let on. There was a Friday, end of the quarter. They brought in a guest speaker for leadership training. an executive coach, big name in the industry. She gave a talk on unconscious bias, on how we confuse confidence with competence, how we reward visibility over actual value. Jason looked uncomfortable. He crossed his arms, scrolled his phone under the table, didn't clap when it ended. I sat there, hands folded, heart steady, because for once, someone said it out loud, with charts, with receipts, with a microphone, and the room had to hear it. That Monday, HR sent out an anonymous pulse survey. Employee experience, equity, belongings. I filled it out. Fully. Honestly. So did a lot of others. I could tell. Because conversations started happening. In the kitchen. By the elevators. Soft. But real. People talking about who gets promoted. Who gets protected. Who gets silenced. It was like the fog was thinning. Jason started pulling back. Well, Gittel. He stopped pushing into meetings he wasn't invited to. Stopped treating me like an obstacle. Started keeping to himself more. I think he realized that the old game wasn't working. That the quiet assumptions were no longer unspoken. But I didn't gloat, didn't celebrate, because this wasn't about beating him. It was about surviving. And finally, thriving. I kept my head down. But not in fear. In focus. Because I knew. Something was coming. Something bigger. The VP called me into her office. Oh, she said, "We're creating a new leadership path. One that doesn't require waiting in line behind people who haven't earned it. And I think you should be on it." I nodded. Said, "Thank you." But inside, I broke. Not in pain, but in release. Because finally, someone saw the work. Not just the shine. Not just the performance. But the real thing underneath. I walked back to my desk. Sat down. Breathed in. Breathed out. Jason walked by. Didn't say anything. But his eyes said plenty. It wasn't anger. It was realization. That talent, real talent, doesn't need to shout, or step on others, or cut corners. It just needs room to be seen. And I was finally being seen. Change is never a straight line. It's messy, full of pauses, backslides, and unexpected turns. After the leadership path invitation, I thought maybe the hardest part was over. But it was. Jason wasn't the only one uncomfortable with the shift. There were whispers behind closed doors. Quiet meetings that excluded me. Emails that didn't include my name. Small moves to slow me down. But I learned something crucial. Talent is resilient. And so am I. I doubled down on my work. Stayed late. Reviewed every detail. Prepared for every meeting. Not to prove them wrong, but to prove myself right. Because when you've spent years being overlooked, you don't just want to be seen, you want to be undeniable. That meant no shortcuts, no relying on favors, no playing games. Just me, my skills, my voice. There was a moment during a product review. Jason tried to interrupt. Twice, I held my ground. Calmly, clearly, I finished my point. The room shifted again. Not because I was louder, but because I was steady. I could feel eyes on me. Some supportive, some surprised, some resentful. But I didn't care. I was tired of shrinking, tired of fading into the background, tired of pretending that the glass ceiling was invisible. I started mentoring others, junior colleagues who looked like me, telling them, don't wait for permission, don't wait to be noticed, create your own space. And something beautiful happened. We formed a quiet network, not a rebellion, but a community, where voices lifted each other, where ideas grew louder, where talent wasn't just recognized, it was nurtured. Jason noticed. More than ever, he tried to join in, but it felt forced, like he was playing catch-up. The VP noticed too. She pulled me aside one day, said, "You're becoming a leader, not just in title, but in presence." I smiled, because that was the goal. It wasn't just about the next promotion or the corner office. It was about changing the way things worked, about making sure no one else had to fight this hard. I still wonder sometimes if my skin color slowed me down, if the bias was real, or just in my head. But I don't let that question stop me anymore. I keep moving forward, one steady step at a time, because real talent deserves to be seen, heard, and celebrated. And I'm here to make sure it happens. There comes a moment in every career when the path forward isn't just about what you do, but about who you become. After months of quiet persistence, I realized I was no longer just trying to prove myself to others. I was proving it to me. Jason's promotion to CEO happened, and it hit like a wave, a mix of shock and frustration, because I had been there longer, worked harder, delivered better results. But that was the reality. He moved up faster, even with less skill, less experience. I asked myself why, over and over. Was it luck, connections, or something deeper? It felt like a mirror reflecting an uncomfortable truth, that sometimes talent alone isn't enough. I felt invisible again, but not defeated, because invisibility can be a kind of power too. It lets you watch, observe, learn the game from every angle. I started asking questions, not loud, not confrontational, just direct. Why was Jason chosen? Who made the decision? What were the criteria? Answers came in fragments, corporate jargon, empty platitudes. But behind it all, I sensed fear. Fear of change. Fear of disrupting the comfortable. Fear of admitting bias. That fear made me stronger, not bitter. Because real change doesn't come from anger. It comes from clarity, from steady purpose. I kept building my case, documenting my work, gathering allies, sharing my vision. The harder it got, the more determined I became. Because I knew, if the system was broken, it was up to me, and others like me, to fix it. Jason remained CEO, but I stopped comparing myself to him. Instead, I focused on what I controlled: my skills, my network, my integrity. And slowly, the world began to listen. The shift didn't happen overnight. It was slow, like water wearing down stone. People started asking for my input more, not just in meetings, but in strategy sessions, in client calls, in planning discussions. I was no longer just a junior manager. I was a trusted voice. It felt good, but also complicated, because with more attention came more scrutiny, more expectations, more pressure. I had to prove that I deserved this trust. Every single day, there were moments of doubt, when the weight of it all felt too heavy, when the old doubts crept in. Was I really good enough? Was this just temporary? But then I remembered the work, the late nights, the extra miles, the people I was lifting up along the way. And I kept going. I realized that true leadership isn't about a title or a corner office. It's about impact, about influence, about inspiring others to rise. Jason and I, we were on different paths now. Not enemies, not friends, just two men with very different stories. I learned to stop asking why he was ahead and started asking what I could do next. That mindset changed everything, because the real fight wasn't against him. It was against the system, the biases, the invisible barriers. And I wasn't just fighting for me anymore. I was fighting for every talented person who might get overlooked. That's when the real work began. The turning point came unexpectedly. During a big client presentation, one of the company's largest deals, the kind of opportunity that can change everything. Jason was supposed to lead it, but he backed out last minute, said he had a personal emergency. The room was silent. All eyes turned to me. It was my moment. I felt a rush, excitement mixed with nerves. But I was ready. I took the lead, walked through every slide, answered every question, stayed calm under pressure. By the end of the meeting, the client was impressed. The deal was moving forward. People started noticing, not just my work, but my confidence, my ability to step up when it mattered. That moment shifted how I was seen. From junior manager to someone who could lead big projects. But it wasn't just about that one presentation. It was about proving to myself that I belonged here, that my skills were real, that my voice mattered. Jason's promotion didn't define me anymore. What mattered was what I did next. And from that day forward, I focused on showing up every day, ready to lead, ready to be heard. After that big presentation, I noticed subtle changes around the office. Colleagues who once ignored my ideas started asking for my thoughts. Managers who barely glanced at me now nodded when I spoke. But the most important change was inside me. Confidence wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was a tool, a way to own my space. Still, old doubts tried to creep in. Was this acceptance real, or just temporary? I reminded myself, change is a process, not a moment. I focused on building relationships, connecting with others, showing genuine interest, and sharing credit. I learned that leadership isn't a solo act. It's a team effort. Jason and I crossed paths less often. But when we did, there was respect, no longer competition. I realized something else too. Success isn't just about climbing ladders. It's about building them for others. So I started mentoring younger employees, especially those who felt overlooked, because I knew what it was like to work hard, to be passed over, to wonder if talent was enough. And helping others grow helped me grow too. This was the real promotion, the one that mattered most. With time, I realized the company culture was shifting too. Not just because of me, but because of many voices, many stories, many people pushing for change. Conversations about diversity and inclusion started happening more openly. Not just in meetings, but in casual hallway chats, lunch breaks, team gatherings. It was messy, imperfect, but real. People started recognizing the gaps, the unconscious biases, the ways the system favored some over others. And that recognition mattered. It didn't fix everything overnight, but it opened doors, opened minds. I remember one day, a senior leader pulled me aside, said, "Your perspective is changing the way we think. Keep pushing." That felt good. Validation, but also a challenge. Because real change needs more than words. It needs action. I continued to speak up, to share ideas, to call out unfairness when I saw it. Sometimes that meant pushing against discomfort. Sometimes it meant standing alone. But I never lost sight of why I started. To make sure talent was truly recognized, no matter who you are. That vision kept me going, even on the toughest days. Because in the end, that's what matters most. One afternoon, I found myself in a leadership meeting. The room was full of seasoned executives, white men mostly. Their voices filled the air with confident opinions. I sat quietly at first, listening, taking it all in. Then the conversation shifted to promotion, less, to leadership development, to who would get the next big role. I noticed the usual names being tossed around. The same few men. It felt like a closed circle, one that didn't include people like me. But I knew better. I had the skills, the results, the vision. So I spoke up, clear and steady, not aggressive, just honest. I said, I am ready. I want to lead. I have proven my ability. The room went quiet. A few heads nodded. Others looked surprised. That moment was a test. Would they hear me? Would they see me? And slowly, things began to change. Small at first, then bigger. Because sometimes, breaking through the noise means making yourself impossible to ignore. I learned that speaking up is not just about words. It's about presence, confidence, and persistence. And I was ready to give all three. From that moment on, I noticed a shift in how people treated me. It wasn't just about respect anymore. It was about trust. Managers began including me in strategy meetings. Clients asked for my input directly. Team members came to me for guidance. I wasn't just a junior manager. I was becoming a leader. But leadership brought new challenges too. I had to balance being firm without seeming aggressive, being confident without sounding arrogant. It was a fine line, one I learned to walk carefully. Sometimes I made mistakes. Sometimes I felt exhausted. But I never lost sight of my goal: to break the mold, to prove that talent shines brightest when given a fair chance. Jason and I had very different journeys, but both taught me something valuable. He showed me the power of ease, of connections. I showed myself the power of grit, of persistence. Together, they created a new kind of strength, one that no title alone can give. As I grew in my role, I started noticing patterns that were hard to ignore. Some people got opportunities just because they fit a certain image. Others got overlooked despite their talent. It wasn't always obvious. Sometimes it was subtle, the kind of thing you only feel deep down. I realized that color and background were still influencing decisions, even when no one said it out loud. That was frustrating, and it made me question everything again. Was I really making progress, or just moving around in circles? But then I thought about all the small wins, the moments when my voice was heard, the projects I led successfully, the respect I earned. Those mattered more than any invisible barrier. I started focusing on what I could control: my work, my attitude, my growth. And I kept pushing the boundaries, not just for me, but for others who looked like me. Because real change isn't just personal, it's collective. And that gave me strength. One day, I found myself in a conversation with a mentor. He was a seasoned leader, not someone who sugar-coated things. He said something that stuck with me. He said, "Sometimes the system isn't fair. Sometimes you will face barriers you can't see. But you have to find ways to rise anyway." He told me to focus on what I could control. My skills, my mindset, my relationships, and to build a network, not just of allies, but of advocates who would speak for me when I could. That advice changed how I approached my career. I started reaching out more, building connections, finding mentors and sponsors. I realized talent alone isn't enough. You need support. You need champions. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Because the fight wasn't just for me. It was for every talented person who deserved a chance. Building those connections wasn't simple. It took time and effort. I attended events, joined groups, reached out to people I admired. Sometimes I felt out of place, like I didn't belong. But I reminded myself why I was there. To open doors, not just for me, but for those who would come after. Slowly, I found allies, people who believed in fairness, who wanted to see real talent rise. With their support, I took on new projects, led initiatives, showed what I could do, and each success built more trust, more respect. It was a cycle, positive and powerful, but I also learned to be patient, because change takes time and persistence, even with support. The road was not always smooth. There were moments of doubt, times when I questioned if I belonged. Some days felt heavier than others, when biases showed up again, when decisions seemed unfair. But I held on to my purpose. I reminded myself, I earned my place here, not just for me, but for everyone watching. And I kept pushing forward, learning from setbacks, growing stronger. I learned that resilience is more than bouncing back. It's about moving forward, with purpose, even when the path is unclear. That mindset became my anchor. It helped me face challenges with calm, with strength, and I knew the real victory was in never giving up. There was a time when I felt completely invisible. It wasn't because I wasn't doing good work. It was because the system seemed to have other plans for me. Every day, I showed up early, stayed late, stayed committed like my future depended on IT because it did. But my efforts sometimes felt like shouting into a void. Ideas I shared were overlooked. Work I completed was praised when others presented it. I often wondered if my race was the invisible wall I couldn't break through. Was I just being too sensitive? Or was there a deeper problem? One day, after a particularly rough meeting where my input was ignored, I sat alone at my desk, feeling frustrated and exhausted. That's when I realized I had two choices. One, I could accept this as my reality and keep quiet. Or two, I could find a way to rise above it. I chose the second. But rising above wasn't simple. It wasn't just about working harder. It was about working smarter. I started paying attention to how others communicated. I noticed who got listened to and why, who got promoted and how they presented themselves. I practiced my communication. I refined my approach. I found ways to make my voice not only heard, but respected. I also began documenting my accomplishments meticulously. Numbers, results, client feedback, everything. Because sometimes, you have to show proof louder than words. Along the way, I sought allies. People who believed in fairness. People who valued talent above all else. I was lucky to find a few mentors who offered honest advice and guidance. They taught me that talent alone is rarely enough. You need strategy, relationships, and resilience. There were setbacks too. Times when I felt defeated. When the system pushed back hard. But every setback taught me something valuable. How to adapt. How to persist. How to believe in myself, even when the world seemed to doubt me. Jason, the guy who got promoted to CEO, was a constant reminder of what I was up against. He had fewer skills, less experience, yet somehow the system favored him. It stung. It felt unfair. But I also realized this wasn't just about him. It was about a broader issue. A culture that needed to change. And if I wanted to change it, I had to be part of the solution, not just complain about the problem. So I doubled down on my efforts. I became more visible in meetings. I volunteered for challenging projects. I built bridges across teams. I learned to manage not just my work, but perceptions. How people saw me. How I influenced decisions. It was a learning curve. Sometimes painful. Sometimes exhilarating. I discovered that leadership is not about titles. It's about impact. It's about influence. It's about making others believe in your vision. And the best leaders lift others as they rise. That became my mantra. Even though my promotion was delayed, I found satisfaction in growing my skills and helping others grow too. Every small victory was a step forward. A piece of the puzzle. The real breakthrough wasn't when I got a new title. It was when I stopped letting the system define my worth. I stopped waiting for permission to shine. I created my own spotlight. Looking back now, I see how far I have come. The journey is far from over. But I know this much. Real talent will always find a way to be seen. Maybe not overnight. Maybe not in the way you expect. But it will shine through the cracks. And when it does, it changes everything. One thing I learned along the way is that the path to success is never a straight line. You expect that if you work hard and have the skills, then promotion, recognition, and respect will come. But real life rarely works like that. Sometimes the journey feels like walking through a maze with no map. I remember moments when I questioned everything. Why am I not moving faster? Why does it seem like others with less experience are getting ahead? Why is my work undervalued? Those questions kept swirling in my mind. They made me doubt myself. But I also realized something important. These questions are part of the struggle for many. It's not just me. That was both comforting and challenging at the same time. Comforting because I wasn't alone. Challenging because it meant the system had deep issues. So I decided to focus on what I could change. That meant sharpening my skills continuously. I took courses. I sought feedback. I embraced every learning opportunity, no matter how small. I started setting clearer goals, not just for my next promotion, but for my personal growth. I also learned to celebrate small wins. Every positive client feedback, every project completed ahead of schedule, every teammate who came to me for advice, those moments mattered. They built my confidence back up. At the same time, I became more aware of how important mindset is. It's easy to fall into negativity when you face bias or slow progress. But I realized that mindset can either be a trap or a tool. It can hold you back or push you forward. So I chose to train my mind to see challenges as opportunities, to see setbacks as lessons, to keep faith in my abilities, even when the world seemed to doubt me. That shift made a huge difference. I stopped comparing myself constantly to Jason or others. Instead, I focused on my own journey, on my own story, on the impact I wanted to make. And little by little, things began to change. Not because the system suddenly became perfect, but because I became stronger within it. I learned to advocate for myself, to speak up with confidence, to build a network of support that could amplify my voice. That made all the difference, because in the end, talent needs a platform to shine. And sometimes, you have to build that platform yourself. I want to talk about one thing that surprised me the most on this journey. It was how important relationships really are. I used to think it was all about skills and results. Do good work, and promotions will follow. But it's more complicated than that. Relationships shape how people see you. They shape who gets trusted with big opportunities, who gets invited to important meetings, who gets noticed when promotion time comes around. I had to learn how to build real connections, not just surface level, but genuine relationships based on respect and trust. That meant getting out of my comfort zone, reaching out to colleagues across departments, joining social events, asking questions, listening more than talking. I learned to find common ground with people I might not have expected. Sometimes it was through small talk about weekend plans. Sometimes it was deep conversations about career goals and challenges. Those moments created bonds. And those bonds opened doors. Because people like to work with people they trust. They want to support those they know well. And that sometimes means those people get promoted faster. I started noticing patterns. Who was invited to the informal lunches? Who got the nod for cross-team projects? Who received mentorship offers? I realized those weren't random. They were the result of years of relationship building. I began to work on my own network deliberately. I identified mentors, sponsors, and allies. Mentors who gave advice. Sponsors who advocated for me behind closed doors. Allies who stood up for fairness. It changed my perspective. Work wasn't just a place to do a job. It was a community. A community I could shape and be part of. And that gave me new energy and purpose. It didn't fix everything overnight, but it made me more confident, more visible, and ultimately more prepared for when opportunities came. There was a moment when I realized that simply working hard was not enough. Hard work is expected. It is the baseline. But to move forward, you need to work smart. I started observing the people who got ahead the fastest. It wasn't always the smartest or the hardest workers. It was often those who understood the politics of the workplace, the unspoken rules, how decisions were made, who held the real influence. I had to learn this language too. I learned to ask the right questions, to be aware of timing, to know when to push and when to hold back. This didn't mean changing who I was. It meant adapting to the environment, becoming fluent in the culture. I also learned the importance of presenting my ideas clearly. Not just what I was saying, but how I said it. Confidence mattered. Tone mattered. Even body language mattered. I practiced speaking up in meetings. Not too much, but enough to be noticed. I prepared notes to stay focused. I learned to tell stories with my data, to make my points relatable. That made people listen. I started to realize that visibility is a skill. It's not about bragging. It's about making sure your contributions are seen and understood. And that skill opened doors I didn't even know existed. The hard truth was that talent alone would never be enough to break some barriers. You needed strategy, relationships, and communication. And that's what I set out to master. Sometimes, I wonder how different things would have been if I had learned this earlier, how much easier my journey could have been. The truth is, talent and hard work only take you so far. There is a whole other layer that many people don't talk about openly. It's the layer of influence. It's about who supports you when you're not in the room, who speaks up for you when decisions are being made, who thinks of you when opportunities arise. I realized early on that Jason had something I didn't. He had sponsors, people higher up who saw him as more than just an employee, people who believed in him, people who pushed his name forward. I had mentors too, but they weren't always sponsors. Mentors give advice and guidance. Sponsors take risks on you. They fight for you in private conversations. They open doors you didn't even know existed. That was the missing piece for me. I wasn't invisible, but I wasn't visible enough in the right circles. Visibility is not about standing on a table and shouting. It's about subtle influence. It's about planting seeds, building trust, showing up consistently. One of the hardest things I faced was learning to ask for help. I used to that asking for help was a sign of weakness, that I had to figure everything out on my own. But the truth is, nobody succeeds alone. Asking for help builds connection. It shows vulnerability and humility. It invites others into your journey. It's a powerful way to create allies. So I started reaching out. I asked colleagues for feedback. I sought advice on how to navigate tricky situations. I even asked for introductions to people I wanted to learn from. Each small request opened up new conversations. And with those conversations came new opportunities. Another thing I learned was how to handle setbacks. There were times when I felt invisible, times when I was passed over for projects, times when my ideas were ignored. Those moments stung. They made me question everything. But I learned to reframe those setbacks, to see them not as failures, but as detours. Detours that gave me space to grow, to prepare for the next chance. I reminded myself that everyone's journey is different. Some people get quick wins. Others have to work in the shadows for years. That doesn't mean you're less talented. It just means your time is coming. Patience became a powerful ally. So did persistence. I started keeping a journal of my achievements. Small wins, big wins, moments where I made a difference. Whenever I doubted myself, I read back through those pages. It reminded me of my worth. It gave me strength to keep going. I also learned to celebrate others' success. Even when it was hard. Seeing Jason get promoted while I stayed in the same role was painful. But I chose not to let envy consume me. Instead, I congratulated him sincerely. I looked for lessons in his journey. What did he do differently? What could I learn from him? That shift in mindset made me more open to collaboration. And collaboration opened doors. I started volunteering for cross-team projects. I showed up early to meetings. I stayed late to help solve problems. I became someone who could be counted on. That reputation spread. Slowly but surely, people started noticing me for the right reasons. I also became more intentional about my personal brand. I crafted a clear message about what I bring to the table. Not just my skills, but my values. My commitment. My unique perspective. That clarity made it easier for others to understand my potential. I stopped hiding in the background. I started sharing my story. In small ways at first. In one-on-one conversations. Then in team meetings. Then at company events. Each time I shared, my confidence grew. And with confidence came influence. Looking back, I see that my journey was about more than just climbing the corporate ladder. It was about finding my voice, claiming my space, owning my story. That is something no one can take away from you, no matter how unfair the system may seem, no matter the color of your skin. Your talent is real. Your hard work is real. And your story matters. You don't have to wait for the world to recognize you. You can start by recognizing yourself. Because when you do, everything changes. There is something deeply personal about realizing that the path you expected to take is not the path you are on. I always imagined that if I worked hard enough, did all the right things, the promotions and recognition would come naturally. But reality was different. It forced me to question a lot of things. Not just about the company I worked for, but about myself. I asked myself tough questions. Why was Jason moving up faster? Why did his ideas get heard before mine? Was it really about skills and performance? Or was there something else at play? I began to see the subtle barriers that exist in many workplaces. Barriers that are not written in any policy manual, but are felt every day. Microaggressions that chip away at confidence. Assumptions made about your capabilities based on your background. Moments when you are the only one who looks different in the room. I'm talking about the kind of exclusion that is invisible but very real. It's the feeling of being underestimated, of your potential being doubted without cause. That's what makes these experiences so exhausting. You have to prove yourself again and again, not just to do your job, but to break stereotypes. I remember meetings where I would suggest ideas, only to be met with silence. Then Jason would say the same thing 5 minutes later, and the room would light up with excitement. It made me wonder if the issue was my voice or the color of my skin. I wrestled with these thoughts for a long time. It wasn't easy. There were days when I felt invisible, and it hurt. But I refused to let it define me. Instead, I used it as fuel. Fuel to work harder, yes, but also fuel to become smarter about how I navigated the system. I started seeking out allies, people who understood these challenges and were willing to stand with me. It made a difference to know I wasn't alone. One of the biggest lessons I learned was that you have to advocate for yourself. Then, no one else will do it for you. That means speaking up even when it's uncomfortable. That means making sure your achievements are documented and visible. That means asking for feedback and using it to grow. It also means being willing to take risks, to volunteer for projects outside your comfort zone, to put yourself forward for leadership opportunities. I remember the first time I did this. I was terrified, but it paid off. That project became a turning point. It showed people what I was capable of. It gave me confidence. It made me realize that sometimes you have to create your own opportunities. You can't wait for someone else to hand them to you. That mindset shift was powerful. But I also realized that change has to come from the top. Organizations need to do more to create fair and inclusive workplaces. Not just in words, but in action. That means diverse hiring panels, bias training that actually works, clear pathways for advancement, mentorship programs that connect employees from underrepresented groups with sponsors who can advocate for them. I became involved in employee resource groups, spaces where people like me could share experiences and support one another. It was healing to talk openly about the challenges, and empowering to work together for change. Still, the biggest change had to happen within me. I had to believe in my own worth, even when others didn't see it yet. I had to silence the doubts and the fears. I had to own my narrative. That is the true power of resilience. It's not about never facing obstacles. It's about rising each time you fall. About standing tall even when the world tries to push you down. So here I am today, still on this journey. Still fighting for the recognition I deserve. Still building the career I dreamed of. But now I do it with a different strength. With the knowledge that I am more than my job title. More than the limitations others try to place on me. And I share this story because I know I'm not alone. If you are feeling stuck or overlooked, know that your talent is real. Your dreams are valid. And your voice matters. Keep pushing. Keep believing. Because the real talent will be seen. The real talent will rise. And the world will have no choice but to notice. There is something about being overlooked that can change you. Not overnight, but slowly, quietly. It seeps into your thoughts, your confidence, your sense of belonging. I never imagined I would feel invisible in a room full of people who were supposed to be my colleagues. But it happened again and again. Sometimes it was subtle, like being talked over in meetings, or having my ideas credited to someone else. Other times it was blatant, like watching Jason get praised for work he barely did. He was promoted to CEO while I was still a junior manager. He had fewer skills, less experience, but he had something I didn't seem to have. Something invisible, a kind of privilege. That made people listen to him differently. That gave him the benefit of the doubt. I thought about fairness a lot during those years. I believed that hard work would be enough to level the playing field. But I was wrong. Hard work is important, but it is not the whole story. There are layers to success that go beyond what you do at your desk. There are networks, connections, perceptions. There is the way people see you before they hear your words. I struggled with anger and frustration. I wanted to scream sometimes. Why wasn't my talent enough? Why was color blocking my path? But anger only got me so far. It didn't open doors. It didn't get me promotions. Instead, I focused on what I could control. My skills. My attitude. My mindset. I sought out mentors who could guide me. People who understood the challenges and helped me navigate them. I learned how to present my ideas more clearly. How to build alliances. How to ask for what I deserved. And slowly, things began to change. Not immediately, not magically, but steadily. I was still overlooked sometimes, still underestimated. But I was no longer invisible. I had found my voice. I had found my confidence. One of the hardest lessons was learning to separate my worth from others' opinions. It's easy to internalize rejection. To believe the world's silence means you don't matter. But that is a lie. You matter. Your work matters. Your dreams matter. I remind myself of this every day. Because the journey is not just about getting a title. It is about being recognized for who you are and what you bring. It is about breaking down barriers for those who come after you. I also realized something else. I can't do this alone. Change takes community, support, understanding. I started connecting with others who felt the same frustrations. We shared stories, encouraged each other, pushed for change within the company. Together, we became a force. We organized workshops on diversity and inclusion. We created spaces where voices like mine could be heard. I took part in panels and discussions to raise awareness. It was exhausting but necessary work. Because silence is complicity. Ignoring these issues only lets them fester. I want every person who feels invisible to know this. You are not alone. Your experiences are valid. Your voice deserves to be heard. There is power in speaking up, in standing firm, in refusing to be sidelined. And I want to be clear about something. This is not just a story about race or color. It is a story about fairness, about opportunity, about talent being recognized wherever it is found, about the promise of a workplace where everyone can thrive. I still have days when the frustration hits hard, when I wonder if I am doing enough. But then I remember how far I've come, how many doors I have opened for myself and others. And I keep going, because the fight for equality and recognition is ongoing. And because I believe in a future where no one is left behind, where merit truly matters, where real talent shines brightly. And I want to leave you with this. If you feel blocked, overlooked, or underestimated, do not give up. Your time will come. Keep sharpening your skills. Keep building your network. Keep believing in your worth. Because the world needs your voice, your ideas, your talent. And one day soon, you will look back and see that you were never invisible. You were just waiting for your moment to be seen. And that moment is closer than you think. There was a moment, not long ago, when I realized that the story I've been living was bigger than just me. It wasn't just about my own journey or my own struggles. It was about something systemic, something that affected so many people who looked like me. People who worked just as hard, who had just as much to offer, but who were still passed over. I started paying closer attention to the patterns around me, to the stories people shared quietly in hallways and break rooms. Stories of frustration, of missed opportunities, of doors slammed shut. I met Sarah one day during a company event. She was a junior analyst, bright and ambitious. She told me how she had applied for a promotion twice and never even got an interview. How her ideas in meetings were ignored until repeated by someone else. Her voice was familiar. Her experience mirrored mine. And that's when it hit me, this was not an isolated case. It was a shared reality for many of us. I began researching, looking for data and reports that confirmed what I felt in my gut. Studies showed that racial bias in the workplace was still very real. That people of color were often overlooked for leadership roles. That they had to work harder just to be seen as equal. That even when promoted, they were often the only ones in those positions. The statistics were sobering, but they also fueled my determination. If this was a problem, then it was a problem I could help fix. I started talking more openly about my experiences. At first, it was scary. I worried about being labeled difficult or ungrateful. I worried about repercussions. But I realized that silence only helped keep the problem alive. So I spoke. In meetings, in one-on-ones, in company forums. I shared my story, and I encouraged others to share theirs. We formed a group focused on diversity and inclusion, a safe space where we could discuss challenges and solutions, where we could support each other, where we could push for real change. We approached management with data and personal testimonies. We asked for bias training, for mentorship programs, for transparent promotion criteria. At first, the response was cautious. Some leaders seemed uncomfortable. Some were defensive. But over time, things began to shift. Small changes were made. Bias awareness workshops were introduced. Employee resource groups were supported. Mentorship programs started to include more diverse leaders. I was proud of these wins, but I knew the work was far from done. Because systemic change is slow, it requires persistence, it requires courage, and it requires everyone's commitment. I also learned to celebrate the small victories, the moments when a colleague acknowledged my contribution, when a junior team member told me my advice helped them succeed, when I was invited to participate in important projects. These moments reminded me why I kept pushing, why I refused to let frustration consume me, why I believed that progress was possible. Along the way, I also grew personally. I learned to be patient but firm, to listen more and judge less, to find allies in unexpected places, to use my voice not just for myself, but for others who might not yet have found theirs. I discovered that leadership is not just about titles. It is about influence, about inspiring change, about lifting others up. And that realization transformed how I approached my career. I started focusing less on competing and more on collaborating, less on proving myself and more on building community. I found strength in vulnerability, in admitting when I didn't have all the answers, then asking for help, in learning from mistakes. I also realized that my worth is not defined by a title or a corner office. It is defined by my integrity, my passion, my commitment to doing good work. And that gave me a kind of freedom. Freedom to be authentic, to bring my whole self to work, to challenge the status quo without fear, to dream bigger. As I reflect on this journey, I am filled with hope. Hope for a future where talent is recognized fairly, where diversity is celebrated, where opportunity is accessible to all, where no one has to feel invisible or undervalued. I want to be part of creating that future, and I believe that each of us has a role to play. Whether you are just starting out or already leading a team, Whether you are from a majority group or a minority group, whether you are an employee or a manager, we all have the power to make a difference. By listening, by learning, by advocating, by acting, change begins with awareness and grows through action. So if you feel stuck or overlooked today, if you question whether your efforts will ever be noticed, remember this: you are seen, you are valued, your work matters, and your voice deserves to be heard. Keep going, keep pushing, keep believing, because the real talent will be seen. And it starts with you. I want to tell you about the day things changed for me. Not dramatically, not with fireworks or grand announcements, but quietly, in a way that felt like the beginning of something new. It was a typical morning at work. I arrived early, like always, coffee in hand, ready to dive into my tasks. I had a meeting scheduled with one of the senior leaders, Mr. Thompson. He was someone I admired, but also feared a little. His reputation was that of a tough but fair boss, the kind who demanded excellence and gave little room for mistakes. I walked into his office, heart pounding slightly. We exchanged greetings. Then he surprised me. He said, "I have been reviewing your work and your contributions. Your analysis on the Henderson project was thorough and insightful. I want to invite you to join a special leadership development program starting next month." I was speechless. This was the opportunity I had been waiting for. The moment I had doubted would ever come. Mr. Thompson continued, explaining that the program was designed to prepare future leaders of the company. It was selective, competitive, and it came with mentorship from top executives. I felt a rush of emotions: pride, gratitude, but also a flicker of doubt. Why me? Why now? I remembered the years of hard work, the countless late nights, the times I had stayed silent in meetings when I wanted to speak up, the moments I had second-guessed myself. I realized this was the result of persistence, of showing up every day, even when it felt like my efforts went unnoticed. This invitation was validation, a sign that my talent was finally being recognized. I accepted immediately. And as I walked out of his office, I felt a new sense of purpose. I was no longer invisible. I was on a path that would challenge me, push me, and help me grow. Over the next weeks, I immersed myself in the program. I learned about leadership styles, decision-making, and strategic thinking. I met colleagues from different departments, backgrounds, and experiences. We shared our stories, our struggles, our dreams. The program was intense but rewarding. It taught me not only about leadership, but about myself, about the power of resilience, the importance of empathy, the need to create spaces where everyone feels valued. I started seeing my workplace differently, not just as a place to do my job, but as a community, a place where change could happen, where inclusion was more than a buzzword, where real conversations about diversity and equity could take place. I also noticed how my confidence grew, how I began to speak up more in meetings, how I shared my ideas without hesitation, how I supported others who were often overlooked. I became a mentor to some of the newer employees, people who reminded me of myself when I first started. I wanted them to know they were seen, that their voices mattered, that their talent could shine. But this journey was not without challenges. There were still moments when I felt out of place, when old doubts crept in, when I wondered if I truly belonged. Those moments were hard, but I learned to face them head on, to remind myself why I was here, why I deserved this, and to keep moving forward. I also became more aware of the subtle biases that still existed, the microaggressions that could sting even when unintentional, the assumptions people made about me based on my background. I decided to address these issues openly, not with anger or accusation, but with honesty and a desire to educate. I shared my experiences in company forums and diversity panels. I listened to others' stories too. Together, we built understanding. We pushed for policies that promoted fairness and transparency. SL. Only the culture began to shift. Doors that were once closed started to open. Not just for me, but for others like me. I realized that change was possible when we worked together. That progress was a collective effort. That every voice raised mattered. Looking back, I am proud of how far I have come. But I know the journey continues. There is still work to be done. More barriers to break. More minds to open. More stories to tell. And I am ready for it. Because I believe in the power of perseverance, in the strength of community, and in the promise of a future where talent is recognized without bias, where leadership reflects the diversity of the world we live in, where every person has a chance to succeed based on their abilities and dedication. That future is worth fighting for, and I am committed to being part of that fight. If you find yourself feeling overlooked or underestimated, remember this story. Remember that recognition may come when you least expect it. That your efforts are building a foundation for your future success. That you are not alone. And that your time will come. Keep believing in yourself. Keep pushing forward. And never let anyone dim your light. Because the real talent will be seen. And it starts with you. The day Jason was promoted to CEO is etched in my mind. It was the kind of news that sends a shockwave through the office. Whispers in the hallways. Surprised glances exchanged over coffee cups. I was sitting at my desk when the announcement came through the company email. Jason Carter, a CDO. 3 words that hit me like a thunderclap. It was hard to believe. I remembered how he had barely known the basics when we started. No consulting experience. No real grasp of key performance indicators. Yet somehow, he climbed the ladder faster than anyone I had ever seen. Meanwhile, I was still a junior manager. Still grinding away in middle management. Despite my skills, despite my years of hard work, despite the results I had delivered, I tried to understand how this had happened. Was it his charm, his connections, or was there something deeper, something unspoken? I thought about the countless times I had been overlooked, the way my ideas were ignored until Jason repeated them, the way he was praised for taking credit. It made me question everything. Was my color holding me back? Was there an invisible barrier between me and the success I deserved? These thoughts haunted me. I couldn't shake the feeling of frustration, of unfairness, but I also knew I couldn't let this moment break me. I had to find a way forward. So I did what I always do. I focused on my work, on improving myself, on finding ways to add value that couldn't be ignored. I started documenting my achievements more carefully. I asked for feedback regularly. I sought out mentors who could guide me through the corporate maze. And slowly, I began to build a network of allies, people who saw my potential, who believed in me. I also decided to speak up more openly about the issues I faced. Not just for me, but for others like me. I joined the company's Diversity and Inclusion Committee. I volunteered to lead workshops on unconscious bias. I shared my story at company events. At first, it was uncomfortable. There were skeptics, people who didn't want to hear about these problems. But there were also listeners, colleagues who thanked me for speaking out, managers who promised to do better. The company began to implement changes, new hiring practices, more transparent promotion criteria, leadership training focused on equity. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't overnight. But it was progress. At the same time, I kept pushing my own career forward. I took on challenging projects. I led cross-functional teams. I earned certifications and advanced my skills. I learned to navigate office politics without losing myself. I became a leader in my own right. One day, a senior executive pulled me aside. He said, "I've been watching your growth. You have what it takes to be in senior management. We want to give you the opportunity to prove it." I was stunned, but also ready. This was the moment I had worked for. Not because I wanted to compete with Jason, but because I wanted to prove to myself that talent and dedication do matter. That the real talent can shine through. That barriers can be broken. I accepted the challenge. And over the next months, I poured everything into the role. I built strong relationships with my team. I delivered results that exceeded expectations. I mentored others who were struggling. And I made sure my voice was heard. The journey wasn't easy. There were days when doubt crept back in, when I wondered if I was enough. But I reminded myself of where I started, of the small victories along the way, of the people who believed in me. And most of all, I reminded myself that my worth was not defined by anyone else, that my success was mine to create. Looking back now, I see how far I've come. From that nervous new hire in the Lobby. To a leader who is making a difference. To someone who is part of the change they want to see. Jason's promotion was a wake-up call. A moment that forced me to examine the system. To find my own voice. To fight for what I deserve. And to help others do the same. Because this is not just my story. It is the story of many who face similar challenges. Who struggle to be seen for who they truly are. Who battle invisible barriers every day. But it is also a story of hope, of resilience, of progress. The real talent will be seen. It may take time. It may take effort. But it will be seen. And when it is, the world will be better for it. So if you are listening to this and you feel overlooked, if you wonder if your color or background is blocking your path, know this: you are not alone. Your talent matters. Your voice matters. Your dreams matter. Keep pushing. Keep believing. Because your moment is coming. And when it does, be ready to step into the light. To claim what is rightfully yours. And to help others do the same. This is more than a story about one person or one company. It is a call to action. A reminder that change begins with each of us. That diversity and inclusion are not just policies. They are principles that make us stronger. That when we lift each other up, we all rise. And that the future belongs to those who dare to believe in themselves. Who dare to fight for fairness. And who dare to dream of a better tomorrow. The day I realized the real fight was just beginning felt like a turning point. Jason was already CEO. The top of the mountain. But my journey was different. Not a straight climb. Not a clear path. It was more like climbing a wall. With invisible hands pushing me down. After his promotion, things changed in the office. Suddenly, meetings felt colder. The smiles less sincere. People who used to chat casually would avoid eye contact. Sometimes I wondered if it was just my imagination. But deep down, I knew the truth. There was a new barrier between me and the rest of the leadership team. One that had nothing to do with skill or performance. It was about fitting in. About being the right face at the table. I started noticing it more in small ways. Emails that excluded me from important threads. Last-minute meeting invites. Offhand comments that suggested I was less experienced. I wanted to speak up. To call it out. But I feared being labeled difficult. Or worse, being seen as someone who made everything about race. So I stayed silent more than I wanted to. That silence felt heavy. It weighed on my confidence. Made me question my place. But I also knew I could not give up. So I looked for allies. People who understood the unspoken rules. One of them was Linda. She was a senior director with years of experience. A white woman who had herself faced barriers in a male-dominated industry. Linda took me under her wing. She shared her stories of struggle and resilience. She encouraged me to find my own voice. To be bold. To demand the respect I deserved. With her support, I started to push back. Not aggressively, but firmly. I asked for clarification when excluded. I spoke up in meetings, even when my voice shook. I made sure my work was visible. I built relationships with colleagues beyond my immediate team. Slowly, I began to feel the tide turning. People started to recognize my contributions more openly. Some leaders even sought my input on strategic decisions. But the real breakthrough came when I was asked to lead a high-profile project. A project that would define the company's future direction. It was a huge opportunity, one I could not afford to miss. I gathered a team, set clear goals, worked late nights, poured every ounce of energy into making it succeed. And when the project launched, it was a success. Revenue grew. Clients praised our innovation. The company's stock price even climbed. For the first time, I felt seen not just as a junior manager, but as a leader, a driver of change. But even with that success, I knew the work was far from over. Because systemic change does not happen overnight. It takes persistence. It takes courage. It takes voices joining together. I started mentoring younger employees from underrepresented backgrounds, sharing what I had learned, encouraging them to believe in their own potential. I also began writing articles and blog posts about my experiences, about the challenges of navigating corporate culture as a person of color. My words resonated. People reached out to thank me, to share their own stories. And slowly, a community began to form. One that could push for real change. One that could hold leadership accountable. At times, I still felt frustrated. Still felt the sting of unfairness. But I had learned to channel that frustration into fuel. Fuel for growth. Fuel for change. And with every small victory, I grew stronger. More confident. More determined. Now, as I look toward the future, I know this is only the beginning. The path ahead is long, full of obstacles, but also full of promise. Because change is possible. Because talent cannot be hidden forever. Because the world needs diverse leaders at every level. And I intend to be one of them. This is my story. Not just about me, but about everyone who has ever felt overlooked, who has ever doubted their worth, who has ever dreamed of something bigger. Keep believing. Keep pushing. Because your time will come. And when it does, you will be ready. Looking back, I realize the story is not just about one promotion or one person's journey. It is about a system, a culture, a reality that many face but few talk about openly. I want to share what I've learned so others do not feel alone in this. When Jason was promoted to CEO, it was a shock. Not because he was unqualified, but because he was less skilled than I was, and probably many others. That made me question everything. Was my color really blocking me? Was talent just not enough? The truth is, yes, it can be that way. Not because people want it to be, but because of unconscious bias, a prejudice, old habits, and unspoken rules. These things shape who gets noticed, who gets promoted, who is seen as leadership material. It is frustrating. It is unfair. And it is exhausting. But it is also a call to action, a call for all of us to do better, for leaders to look beyond surface, for companies to rethink how they measure talent, to value diversity not just as a box to check, but as a source of strength. The world is changing. The business landscape is evolving. Companies that fail to embrace inclusion will fall behind. I have learned that the first step is to own your story, to be honest about the struggles, but also about the victories. That honesty creates power. It creates connection. It opens doors. Second, build networks. Find mentors and sponsors who believe in you, who will fight for you when you cannot, who will amplify your voice. I found Linda because I looked beyond my immediate team, because I reached out even when I felt vulnerable. Third, never stop learning. Skills are important, but so is emotional intelligence. Understanding office politics, knowing when to push and when to pause. This journey is not just about being the best at your job. It is about being strategic, about knowing how to navigate complex systems. Fourth, invest in yourself. Take care of your mental health. Find balance. Surround yourself with people who lift you up. Because this path can be lonely, and burnout is real. Finally, be a voice for others. Use your platform to advocate for change, to create opportunities for those who come after you. I started mentoring because I wanted to make a difference, because I wanted others to have a smoother path than I did, because change is not just individual, it is collective. It requires all of us to step up. So what now? Where do I go from here? I still want to grow, to lead bigger projects, to have a seat at the table where decisions are made. I want to prove that talent cannot be ignored forever, that dedication and skill will shine through. But I also want to change the system, to help create a workplace where diversity is celebrated, where everyone has an equal shot, where no one has to wonder if their color holds them back. This is more than a personal story. It is a movement, a call for fairness and respect, for recognizing talent wherever it comes from, for breaking down barriers that have stood too long. If you are watching this and feeling stuck, feeling overlooked, remember this: you are not alone. Your value is real. Your talent matters. Keep pushing forward. Keep believing in yourself. Because the world needs your voice, your ideas, your leadership. The road is tough. The journey can be painful. But it is worth it. Because every step you take breaks a cycle. Every victory you earn lights the way for someone else. I do not know exactly when the real talent will be fully seen. But I know it will happen. Because people are waking up. Because awareness is growing. Because voices like yours and mine are louder than ever. So I keep going. I keep working. I keep dreaming. And I hope this story inspires you to do the same. Because the change we want starts with us.